acquired and operationally integrated to Veolia North America in March. It's a bit confusing, but it's a really positive, a development in my career at least, because we're going to a much larger organization, a lot more resources. So as Larry mentioned, my name is Keith Kokobek. I'm Director of Operational Control Systems for our regulated utilities in North America. I've been with Veolia/Suez for 15 years. Prior to that, I had some experience in the pharmaceutical space, and I spent a number of years in management consulting in the banking. So don't ask how I got into SCADA, but afterwards you're certainly welcome to find out how I'm around. Let me first off by saying that I'm a SCADA person, operational person first. Just happened to have to get involved in cybersecurity as part of our due diligence to keep our systems safe and secure. So I approach this a little bit differently than someone from an IT or security background. So you could say I came from the OT space and now I'm learning about the cybersecurity piece. A little bit quick agenda, just an overview of who Veolia and the Municipal Water Regulated Division are, our challenges in the OT space, why we needed to protect ourselves from ransomware and how we did that, our approach, our requirements, which are always a bit unique in the OT space compared to an IT system. EDR tools, what they are, what did we pick? I'll share the vendor, won't share the surprise right now. How we deployed it, the architecture that we used, timelines, and lessons learned. A lot of lessons learned, I'll spend a lot of time on that, and kind of what's next in our roadmap in our cybersecurity vision for our OT systems. So who is Veolia's Municipal Water? So we're a fairly large organization in North America. We're about 11,000 people. 50% of that group makes up our Municipal Water Division. And then another 50% of our Municipal Water Division is our regulated utility. So these are systems we own and operate. We operate in 6 states, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware, Rhode Island, and our outlier way out there in Boise, Idaho. Serve a little over 2 million people with 600,000 connections. Our largest facility is in northeastern New Jersey, Bergen County. We serve about 1 million people out of that facility. So it's a 200 million gallon water treatment plant, one of the largest in the state and critical for our operations. The challenge, let me just summarize. We're all familiar with these events that happened over the last, pretty much in the first half of 2021. The famous Oldsmar situation right before the Super Bowl, remote access, compromise, change of the sodium hydroxide level for the water business. This was kind of an eye-opener. You hear about these things in the background, but this is really one of the first ones that was public in the system. From a Veolia standpoint, on our regulated side, we're very focused on protecting our perimeter. There's a great presentation by Ricky before. We've been through that effort, the remote access piece. We feel very comfortable on that. Then the Colonial Pipeline piece happened a couple months later. The ransomware affected their safety systems, part of their payment systems. Fortunately, did not affect their industrial control system, but for the first time in 50 plus years, the company needed to shut down their transmission pipeline to make sure that everything was safe. And then I'll share this one in the middle. This is a little interesting. Clint prior talked about this. When you look on the dark web, we got notified of someone trying to sell credentials for a $1.1 billion private water company, had some remote access protocol attack. They had some things like Symantec on their system. Well, it's not Symantec as a tool that we were using. We thought it was important enough that we went out there and we purchased the information to find out what this was about. So we spent, less than $2,000 to gain this information. It's amazing how cheap this stuff is on the dark web, but it gave us some insight onto what was out there and what these people were doing to try to exploit a private water company and a utility. And it's very important to know what is happening out there and what is being communicated. A lot of good agencies, they'll come and report it to you, but you also have your own situational awareness. So our challenge, our leadership, these things were coming down. I don't want to say they were spooked, but they asked some very good questions, right? It's something that you want to have that open dialogue with senior leadership. Are we vulnerable? Are we vulnerable to what? As I mentioned earlier, we spent a lot of time securing our perimeter. We've been through the risk assessments. We go through annual risk assessments, annual third-party reviews. We have a SOC. We have systems that are connected to that SOC in the OT environment. And we have penetration testing that occurs quite frequently through our internal resources that, they run that all the time on our public address space. So are we vulnerable? Probably not from an outside perimeter in, but definitely something we need to look at. What is the risk to our business? This one's always hard to summarize. And I always say that we're not in, we're in the risk mitigation business. We're not going to prevent something, we're not going to eliminate that risk. Very difficult to eliminate that risk on the cybersecurity side, and just anyone says they can, it's all right, we need to move to a new partner. Are the measures taken significant? What we've done to date, is it the best that we can do? Can we do better? And the answer is we could always do better. So let's continue to review. We have a roadmap, but is our roadmap structured the right way? You can't tackle cybersecurity, especially in the OT space, by eating the elephant one bite all at once. Got to take your time. How can we prevent ransomware attacks on our systems? Can they be prevented? And this was a gap we had. We did not have something that we knew that we had a ransomware or we can prevent it on our system. So then follow-up question is, how fast can you protect the SCADA systems? We set a timeline of ourselves. This was in about May of 2021. We wanted to be operational by October 1st of 2021. Very short time period. And did I mention that our peak production, the time we do almost no new installs, any upgrades, is from the beginning of May to the end of September. We are pumping water fast and furious during that time. So we really don't like to disrupt that process and keep everything running. Finally, what resources do we need? Not from a financial standpoint. This is kind of interesting. It was all from a people standpoint, a vendor standpoint, a partner standpoint. And then we would figure out the dollar amounts and what it would take to do later. So important, but we did set ourselves a budget to make sure that we did have some guardrails and guide rails in what we did. On the right-hand side, a little bit different approach. There's different approaches to, how this stuff comes in. So it's just important to realize how the attacks are executed. So what do we do? Prior to this, I knew about antivirus software. I really didn't know what an EDR was. Our IT department, and we had an outside company that was helping us, said that we need an EDR solution. So I'm not sure if many of you know what an EDR solution is. I didn't. Endpoint detection and response. Try to sum it up in 3 bullet points, but I don't do it justice in 3 bullet points. It's continually monitoring of each file or interaction on the computer. It's monitoring the ones and zeros, the network traffic, anything that's happening on that computer that looks to be abnormal or that could be a threat, and it's going to block that. It contains that malicious file. Importantly, it prevents it from spreading, and it isolates it. So that's critical. You want that to happen before almost in seconds or milliseconds before it spreads to someplace else. And importantly, it collects all this data, network event data, endpoint data, application data, and it aggregates that all up to the centralized host system. Another key important thing that we did is we hired an outside consultant with EDR experience and OT experience. For me, it's very important to have someone that has worked on the plant floor, that knows what a SCADA system is, what a PLC is, what an OT network is, knows what our flaws are, what our challenges are in that network. I often hear that our IT system, we can just apply the same thing we do in the IT and the OT space. While that's true for a lot of the tools, the way you do it and the how you do it is often very different. And I should say it's a consultant. We hired a partner. Consultant's probably a bad word. It's very important that we have an open relationship and open dialogue so that they can, advise us properly and that we can accept that advice. So from that, we determined what our requirements are to begin to look for a solution. And, these requirements, there's a lot of them. Supported platforms. I was mentioned yesterday in the presentation, XP. Yes, we still have XP. We support over 850 different facilities. We have a variety of every PLC manufacturer known to man. So every year, every there. So we do run XP mostly in VM environments, but we need to support that software. And we also have Linux, CentOS, and Ubuntu. A lot of these tools, these cybersecurity tools, all run in those environments. And then we have everything in between on the Windows environments. Fortunately, 2 years earlier, we turned off our last VAX box, so we don't have to worry about that anymore. So it's a flashback to the 80s and 90s. What do we want from real-time prevention? Really important that we had a connection to threat hunting. What's the benefit of doing EDR and this ransomware protection if we weren't getting that real-time intelligence from the outside world? However, we wanted to control that connection to the outside world. It needed to be centralized. Many of these tools that we ended up looking at, you needed to have every endpoint connected to the internet, which was a non-starter. Proactive risk mitigation, very important. Alerting reports, what are our risks, what are our compromises, pre and post infection protection. Finally, at the bottom, this is kind of big and bold. We can't stop our core application. We do run high availability, but we want to be able to, our operator's on a workstation, he plugs his phone into a USB, it has something on there, he still needs to run his application that's on there. We isolate and stop that, it provides the alert. Other requirements, big benefit, USB devices. We use ServiceNow on our IT side and to track and do our checklists and everything for these types of events, so it was very important to have that integration. We wanted to run, when we started this up, in what's called simulation mode. We didn't want to be fully turned on, secure when we wanted there. We wanted to fingerprint, baseline our environment, review all our applications. The product we chose fortunately had the ability to still provide us alerts on malicious and critical items that we should be aware of. So it allowed us to test not only our ServiceNow integration, but all our processes while we did that. Again, I mentioned partnership. You know, the group we had in here, we wanted somebody with an EDR platform that these folks knew OT. They could talk our language. Finally, this one's pretty important not to overlook, and I've talked to some of the vendors on the floor, and we've discussed this, low computer and network resources. We're spread out, we're all over the place, we're connected with this tool. We have 35 locations, not the highest of bandwidth in some places to bring this data back. We needed to have that to be low bandwidth to come back, and low computer resources, less than 1% utilization, very important. So how did we select a tool? Fortunately, at the same time, our parent company was doing an assessment of 4 different EDR tools. They had some pretty decent testing methodology. Unfortunately, they're confidential, I can't really share, but I'll share that we used the MITRE framework, and the blue boxes are what we selected on. I will say, globally, they got all the OT experts together. We were allowed to review that. It was very interesting when you looked at what their criteria was, focusing on things like ease of install and use, and not really focusing on what's the outcome of the product and how well it works. I don't care if it takes 5 days to install versus 1 day, as long as I'm getting a better benefit out of it. So just something to keep in mind and prioritize what your requirements are when you're doing this type of tool. So at the end, we selected Fortinet EDR platform. It worked for us, kind of checked the majority of our boxes, had that discovery, prediction, and prevent pieces, the next-gen antivirus, real-time detection and diffusing while keeping our systems operational. Very, very important. It's something that our operations team came back and told us we need to do that. Playbooks, incident response, these are probably where we spent the majority of our time when we did this, reviewing the playbooks, everything that went in there, making sure that we had different playbooks for different scenarios. Real-time and automatic. Chris mentioned this in his presentation yesterday, how much automation do you want to have on this? Well, we want to be able to stop the breach, but we're not isolating the computer. We're shutting down the program, still allowing our systems to run and creating the alerts. We want it to be efficient. The fatigues, much like in SCADA systems, right? You can't have too much, one alarm or for every 5 minutes an operator's in there. You can't have too many fatigue alarms because people just ignore it at that point. And then minimize the impact on the business. Talked about that a lot and keeping our stuff online and safe and secure. So how do you deploy something like this? I mentioned earlier we got a 200 million gallon water treatment plant. Well, that's our single source of supply. I'm not shutting down my 200 million gallon water treatment plant for any amount of time, nor am I shutting down all our other facilities. So we developed a roadshow, lots of education to our operations team, our senior management, and we went into the control room and talked to the operators. This is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it. Fortunately, our company has a pretty robust education piece on cybersecurity, monthly 5-minute training classes online. We're doing the identity management, why is this stuff important? So they were very well familiar. They asked questions. They were like, oh, good, we definitely need this. We support it. Just make sure you communicate to us what you're doing. Identifying our resources, establishing the roles of the IT team, the OT team, the outside personnel, our operations. Building an architecture that supported that centralized piece of the connection, as well as connecting all these systems back and doing it securely. Ricky mentioned a lot of firewall rules in his previous one. That's where we spent a lot of time doing that. Installation of the core servers and services. You think this would be kind of a, it was a very well planned out piece, making sure everything was connected. Our security pieces were tested. And then we did a phased approach. We did a pilot and then 3 phases, starting at our smallest facilities, working all the way up to that 200 million gallon treatment plant. And then biggest part of making this operational. So I said it took, we were looking for a 6-month deployment. It took a little bit longer. Here's our architecture. I'll be real quick. We do go to the cloud for the Fortinet threat guard for the threat hunting pieces. That makes me feel better that we have that information. And the key part of that information, it's OT specific, right? You're not only getting the IT specific, you're getting the OT specific threats as well. That links to our next generation firewalls that have that same OT specific threat integration. So we bring it, aggregate that all back to one central data center. Timeline, I mentioned this earlier. I mentioned we wanted to have it on and functioning by October. We didn't. It took us to January of 2022. Why did it take so long? We had to work extensively through that playbook, our application inventory. And the beauty of the OT environment is we get the whitelist stuff. We know what we have, we know what we want to run, and we need to make sure that we cover all that. And when you're dealing with engineering workstations, there's a lot of little nuanced software that goes in to make sure that they can program tools and stuff. A lot of learning going on that actually what happens behind the scenes. And it allowed us some time to add some more functionality to ServiceNow integration. The ServiceNow is pretty critical because as soon as we have something that might be a threat or malicious, it gets isolated, the ServiceNow is automatically, initiates the plan to respond. It goes to multiple people, whether it's 24/7, 365, integrated with our SOC, so that all works together, works really well. When we talk about our lessons learned, very important. I mentioned this. You spend a lot of time educating our staff. The how, the why did we do this? Very, very important. Allow them to ask questions. They all have my email. They have people on my team's email. They're not shy about asking, which is great. Again, that open and honest communication, not just with our staff, but with our partners in this, with Fortinet, with our consulting partner. We asked some crazy questions, and if they didn't know, they got responses and stuff like that very quickly. Tech support was very valuable in certain things that we needed a timely response to. Our timeline was too aggressive. We got a little bit ahead of our skis, but that's fine. Allowed us to, get everything done. So the majority of our time, I mentioned earlier, is understanding the application environment. We had over 300 applications on I think we have over 350 SCADA computers within the network. So there's a lot to sort out. Whitelist, we're down to 35 applications. I spent a lot of time training our security staff. They don't use the 40 EDR on the IT side, they use something else, so there was a lot of nuanced differences there. This next one is very important, and we just spend a lot of time. Collectors is how you group the buckets, so very important to have your naming standard correct on that, and that everyone knows what your naming is. So, right, we have a system in Dallas, Pennsylvania. We want to know that it's in Dallas, Pennsylvania, and that it's our SCADA server, not Dallas, Texas, and it's something else, right? So it's very important to have that distinguished, that our SOC is lined up on that, our security team, our IT team, and our OT team. It's something in our SCADA environment we've spent countless years trying to perfect our tag naming standard and replicating that through all our data, and this is just one more thing. Also want to make sure your SOC vendor, if you're using an outside SOC vendor, we have an MSP, so we wanted to make sure that they were included. Testing is a must. The security team got a little crazy with me. They gave me a USB stick with a fake testing. I'd be out in Boise, Idaho. I'd plug that thing in a computer, and I want to see what happens. So I think they've whitelisted that application, so I need to get something new. So if anyone has anything. Whitelist, we catch anyone installing any type of software on our system now, right? Our SCADA techs, they like to download things from the web. Now that they do that, they can't install it. It's blocked. They have to call up and be like, all right, now I got to make a business case on why we're doing this. Also, it goes with the timeline. There's a lot to config. Some challenges, still working through our USB policies. There's a lot to configure, a lot to set up. I'll move down. We had to end up setting up specific rules for different types of users, an admin or a high-end user that had programming tools and everything else with it. So, and then one thing we learned on the Fortinet side, these pop-ups kept coming up every time there's something that might be compromised. It was driving our operators bananas. We ended up turning them off. So we gave some feedback. Hopefully in the future we're able to customize that a little bit so it's only very specific pop-ups that come up. I'll give you an instance. We use Chrome on the computers. Chrome has an updater that goes out there, which we block. So every time the updater tries to go connect to the web, it popped up, and it just created a bit of a nuisance. So we didn't want that to be a distraction to our operators. What's next in our journey? Ongoing refinement of the EDR. Much like Ricky for Exxon, we spent a lot of time prior to this working on our perimeter with next generation firewalls, looking at OT-specific monitoring tools. Right now, we're working on centralizing all our OT repositories, remote access, Active Directory, some microsegmentation at some of our larger systems, and then level set our SCADA staff. We have 12 dedicated SCADA staff across our business at a certain cybersecurity level of training so that we could all talk the same language. We can assess outside tools, and we all know what we're talking about. An important ongoing training and education of all our employees in our organization, whether it's IT, personal security, or OT security, it's very important. Just a little bit of an event notification, what comes in, what gets seen, but this is a malicious event. If you know what that is, that's Dameware. It's the product that affects all products. It can never get rid of, but something we don't use in our system, but we've gotten rid of it. So thank you all very much.
Good evening, good afternoon, everyone. I know I'm actually standing between you and a cold beer right now, but we're gonna be a little quick on this process. So when we looked at presenting in front of this forum, we wanted to take a different approach. We wanted to come back and look at how we built programs to support a culmination of IT and OT and bridging the gap between the environments. So we needed to define first, from a biopharmaceutical perspective, medical device perspective, what do we do? And why is it important that our products are up and running all the time, helping sustain lives and help people have a better quality of life? So some of the key areas we look at from a cyber risk perspective are as follows. We look at shutting down of the environment. How do we protect product risk and safety risk for the environment? Then we look at the intellectual property risk, compliance, HIPAA, and other regulatory and FDA bodies as well, and anything that could help us understand what an operational disruption to the environment means to the safety of our product, the safety of our facilities, as well as, I'm gonna throw a term out at you, I'm gonna use a new acronym. It's called OOF. We look at CIA, which is confidential integrity and availability, but I look at OOF, I look at organizational, operational, and financial. Because when we define our impacts, we have to look at all those three elements to help us understand the business, okay? And particularly, we look at what happened with COVID and everything else and the quality impact on our environments. But what I want to take away here on this slide is, I'm going to move through the presentation, is that from an OT mindset, we want to make sure that we eliminate this last statement. If it works, don't touch it, and don't interrupt the supply chain. And what I'm saying there is that IT historically has had a negative connotation, negative presence in the OT world. Why? That one event when you patch their server and it brings the environment down and you cannot get it back up within their SLA. Okay, so when we're talking about here, we wanted to bring, again, we're bringing the conversation up to a higher level, because now we have to engage at the strategic level or the C-suite level. We want to talk about what does it mean to create a program that addresses both IT and OT convergence, as well as help you to secure not only your IT assets, but your OT assets, helping make sure that, again, building safer products, keeping the environment up and running. So you have to look at the culture and the mindset changes. You have to look at change management. Not just change management, I'm gonna go back to OOF again. You're looking at change management impacts of operational, organizational, financial. And then of course, how do you plan such a big initiative as this? And then the technology, using technology as an enabler and not as a total driver of the entire system. And I'm gonna give you a couple bonus here. We talk about communication and risk management. I have to throw that in there because as I now move a little bit more into the more the strategic role, I have to throw communications and risk management in that process because those are the areas that we forget about a lot. And so I broke this presentation as we talk about culture and mindset. I apologize for a lot of the rich content or more detailed content of these slides, but I want to make sure you got a better understanding as to why we chose to focus on the barriers and also focus on key success factors. The barriers themselves are the traditional, where the leadership and accountability, they pretty much say, I'm going to dedicate a C-suite person, but he may not be that right person. I may give you a director of audit to run an OT project. You need someone who's responsible for the supply chain. That if something happens, I can go to that VP or SVP or whatever level that person is accountable for making sure the success of this program across the board. You also look at, and I'm not going to drain the slide, we're also going to go down to the Big Bang Theory. Most of the times, organizations want to go big bang. And as we know, OT assets hang around for 15, 20, 30, maybe more years than that. IT assets, 2 to 5 years, max. Lack of consensus. What are we really trying to do here? Sustainability and scalability. But I really want to talk about the successes here. You need to make sure that the CISO and the CIO are not put in a position where they're trying to fund and manage this engagement. It is a supply chain investment. They can be positioned as advisors and provide operational support. Demonstrate a risk by doing a pilot. I would say the biggest bang for your buck right now is doing a pilot. Taking a small organization, a small site, doing a pilot process to make sure that you're going to be successful, because as you start to expand this out regionally, and I'm going to use a phrase my partner coined, think global, act local. And so as you build, you're going to build your site champions, your change champions early on, because these are the ones you're going to use not only just from managing at the regions, but they're also going to be responsible for education and awareness. They're going to be responsible for making sure that the plant managers are successful and the organization is successful. And then focus on the benefit, not just threat detection. What is the true benefit to the organization? If you look at it, if you use the language that the manufacturing folks understand, they understand sustainability, they understand availability, confidentiality, integrity. That's what they focus on. They focus on uptime. And strategic approach, be purposeful, practical, pragmatic, and professional. Professorial. And so what I'm getting at there is the organization defines the purpose. You're defining the purpose of this program, the impact of this program, the disruptions you're trying to, and the use cases you're trying to address. You put it in such a way that it's manageable in smaller chunks. It's also practical to implement, but professorial says that now we talked about the change agents or the change ambassadors. I need you guys out there pushing education and awareness on a consistent basis, making sure that the people who need to know. And then, of course, align accountability and a payment plan. The payment plan I use it as a payment plan because I know we, traditionally on the IT side, we would go and ask for hundreds of millions of dollars, and at the end of the quarter, we may have only spent 20 million. But for every dollar we ask for, the OT side, on the manufacturing side, has to account for that somewhere. So I can't buy a product that's going to cost me $50 million, and then I'm selling my product for $10, $10 an item. Somewhere, someone has to make up for that. And since right now, with the economic situation, and even before that, I can't squeeze all those operational costs, push it in there and push the product up to a non-profitable perspective. And of course, this is a multi-year journey. So now as we start to bring the IT leadership into this program, we have the barriers as mentioned over here. I really want to focus on the area of it's only shared, limited, or restricted information. Communication, communication, communication. Communicate early, often, and to the levels that the organization can understand and the true impact that it's going to have an organization. You want to build that shared awareness to risk. Everyone is accountable for risk within the organization. Their program is accountable for that, and you have to manage accordingly. Inclusive supply chain and ecosystem. You mentioned earlier in some of the other presentations, the ecosystem is expanding. Your ecosystem now is going to include cloud aware, it's going to include cloud, it's going to include other internal, external vendors, all up and down your supply chain. Make sure you get proper representation in that area. And again, I'll go back and I'm going to stress this throughout the entire presentation. The supply chain leader has to be in that partnership relationship and accountable for working whatever within that organization. Demystify. Demystify. Local versus, my application is unique. In every plant, in every organization, you're going to hear that I have 100 sites and everyone is unique. But guess what? Manufacturing is manufacturing. They have some nuances. You may either be making a wet product, a dry product, or electronic product. But manufacturing is manufacturing. So let's get that, let's have that conversation, and let's deal with trying to get to an 80-20 rule. We talked about the cost challenges. It's not just a security implementation, it's an operational implementation. You just can't continue to take more money out of the operational side and not see that there's going to be a degradation in either the product safety or there's going to be your brand is going to start to suffer because people are going to migrate away from your specific environment. Over-communicate throughout the process. Don't force a one-to-one IT and OT convergence. There are different scenarios for IT and there's different scenarios for OT. There's some common scenarios or use cases, but make sure you understand and separate the two. And train resources on unique OT security requirements. That is a must because everyone is dealing with a talent shortage right now. You have to be able to leverage your existing talent pool. Training is easier to take OT person and give them additional cyber skills than to take an IT person and give them OT skills. I show this slide here as we want to demonstrate, as you're going through your process of identifying your program and assessing it against a standard or multiple standards, you may come up with a hybrid, but at least pick one. Start with this is basically going by NIST. But start with NIST, start to build your other manufacturing hybrids or standards as well. But we wanted to show that as you're going through an exercise of identifying the threats, the vulnerabilities, the operational impact, your response, and the timing, when you're creating that risk profile with the business, you want to go through this exercise so that everyone understands I have to go and define my true risk appetite, my risk profile, understanding what it means to a site. A site's always going to tell you I'm up 24/7, but in all actuality, when you peel back the layers of the onion, you find out they're 5/7. Or they're make the stock versus the make the order. And so you have to factor that into your equations for your risk profile. And you go through this different scenario for different areas you want to talk about. And right now what's really hot out there is ransomware and malware. These items are going to always be out there, especially malware. You're going to always have this in your OT environment because, let's be honest, you're running a system that's been running 20, 30 more years. You can't patch it. You may not be able to put antivirus on there, software on there, and you may not be able to take that system down. So you have to put in place mitigation controls and processes to allow for them during their preventive maintenance windows to do some type of support to keep the environment in sync. Business planning. This is the area where we tend to, I'm going to say, we drop the ball a lot from the planning perspective. The C-suite, as well as the IT or corporate side, as we call them, they miss some key elements in helping define that plan. They want quick fix, they want big bang, they want it for the smallest amount of money we can get it, without impacting safety and quality and integrity of the system, which is a little harder to do. So when you're putting together this plan, consciously go through them and help them understand, what does this program really mean? Do we take it in smaller chunks? How do we plan it out? Who do we engage with? And let's agree on some simple milestones. Because at the end of the day, the manufacturing teams, they definitely are focusing on uptime, quality, and customer experience. One of the longest poles in your tent in your testing process is getting through your quality systems and your validation. They will delay you because they have to make sure that the integrity of the product is secured at all times. So, and the regulators will want to make sure that you have an auditable process. So let's keep that in mind. And decreasing downtime, making sure I can get up as much maximum product out of the system as possible. There's an item or bullet point where they say retire legacy assets. This is an area where it's harder to do. It gets complex in the OT world because you have a lot of legacy equipment. There may be systems that are running XP, NT. It's not hard to show that. The problem with that is that because this product is still a viable product, I have to allow those systems to run to continue to meet my safety and regulatory issues, as well as meet my product demand from my customers. They still need that product. I can't just take it down and bring in a new system at one point in time. It costs millions of dollars. It's not cost effective to do. So as much as you can, look for your end-of-life systems, start to patch them. The area that we miss a lot or we don't spend enough attention on is firmware upgrades. And firmware upgrades get tied to upgrades associated with the vendor product. Not picking on Siemens or Rockwell. If you have not kept your contract up to date with Siemens and Rockwell, they're not going to update your systems. They're going to keep you at a minimum release, so you have to work those issues out and say, how do I get, what mitigating controls do I put in place? What compensating controls, if you look at it from a cyber perspective, and how do I make sure that I can restore those environments in case of some type of a problem? And of course, increase organizational awareness. I'm going to keep harping on that because that is one of the biggest problems we see a lot is we're not spending enough time on education and awareness within the fields and within the people who are really relevant or supporting our operational integrity, operation products. Making sure that you've got your program broken down into manageable chunks. Don't bite off, don't do big bang. Big bang is not going to benefit you. So let's make sure you got the ROIs associated with the risk and rewards and the next steps and where you need support from your leadership teams. Let's make sure that we focus on building the foundation first. You're going to hear a lot of folks talking about agile and agility and turn on a dime and time to market. But at the end of the day, if I don't have my foundation built correctly, I can't do agile. And even though I'm in an agile environment and I want to go through digital transformation, I can't do digital transformation if my environments are still at a legacy state where I can't take advantage of the latest and greatest digital transformation technology. And how quickly can I turn to those environments and say, now I need to move quicker on a manufacturing change management process. They can't turn some of those factories around. They can't turn some of those systems around in a day or two. And concentrate your fund on imperatives to success. Making sure that, again, as we talked early on, if you built those, if you know the use cases you're going after, target those. Make sure you can measure them. Make sure you focus your funding on that. It's easier to go back to the C-suite or organization once you've proven those successes that are addressing some of your major flaws or your major bottlenecks and preventing you from moving forward. This is where we think about, this is where we get to think global and act local approach. And as you look at the chain here, you're pretty much looking at making sure, as was mentioned in the previous presentation, collecting of that data centrally, processing and analyzing it, and making sure that as you distribute, as you identify risk across the organization, you can centralize it, report on it, making sure that everyone's on the same page with that. And then regionally, your deployment is going to become a lot easier to do regionally once you've got your proof of concept in place, once you've done your regional assessments and put in place who's going to support this regionally. And this is where, when you work with your partner as in an advisory role and as a holistic solution provider, they can help you regionalize and deploy this, because you're going to be short-staffed, and making sure that you're partnering with a great partner that can actually regionalize this and even send forces out there to help you deploy it. One of the things that was successful for us is that we had a partner that put their process together to help us deploy it regionally, where we didn't have to be on site. It just got deployed automatically. Well, as part of a script, it got deployed automatically within the regions. And the regional representation was there to help us do that. And of course, as you look at your organizational impacts and building those resources, then you can spend more time focusing on training the regional and local resources to support your product and support the environment. Technology as enablers. So I talked about this early on. This is a game changer. You have to have a partner. You have to have technology. But don't use technology as the driving force to your manufacturing, OT, and IT environment, because you're going to get burned, and you're going to get a lot of negative reactions from your C-suite. Make sure you send your partners and your technology folks through a vetting process. Put them through benchmarking and testing. If a partner will not, or if a partner refuses to go through the RFP process with you, then that means you might want to look at a different partner. Because there's a lot of IT and OT partners out there now, but just make sure they're going to be really partners with you. Look at your assessment, your detailed asset inventory, because that is a key, making sure you got your inventory. Now, we know that this has been a problem for the last at least 10 years, getting a good asset inventory. It is still going to be a problem, because you're always going to have those pockets of information or pockets of assets that are either on the network or off the network or hidden behind firewalls, or R&D may say, I'm going to only turn this on when I need it. So now you start in your discovery process, it starts to break down. So making sure that you can get a good asset inventory in their areas as well. I'm not going to tell you, it is a complex environment. And OT and IT is very complex, but it's doable. So just focus on making sure that the technology requirements include your network as well. A lot of times you're going through a network refresh, you're going through an upgrade. You may start to get in the middle of that process. You may deal with another mergers and acquisitions, so that has to be included in this process as well. And don't remember to go to spans, taps, cabling, et cetera, because some of your environments are older, and as you start to go into the network closet, you can see some crazy things. You can see a lot of old wiring and just stuff that is like you thought you saw it in a history book and now you know where it actually was deployed. Looking at the central database, making sure you're collecting all this information, whether you're collecting it in your SIM, whether you're collecting it into a database that you can do some additional aggregation and segregation on, make sure you can do that. But then I'm going to make sure we talk about the OT-sensitive approach. When we talk about the OT-sensitive approach, this is where we kind of break and go back to IT versus OT, but we're still saying that in that approach, there are some items that are specific to OT. They know how to restart those SCADAs. They know which HMIs they need to do. They know the intricate complexities of how that environment works. You have to keep that into your equation when you're creating your playbooks, your runbooks, and factoring in when they have preventive maintenance windows that they can effectively go in and start to apply some of the changes you need them to address. Monitoring and logging is also critical here. There are ways of monitoring OT assets. You have to investigate those and deploy them. Your third-party vendors, hold them accountable. Hold them accountable. They have contracts, they have SLAs. Earlier presentation, it was mentioned that you're looking at your SLAs and you find out that you're missing some things and there was some phone calls that was made that you didn't realize that you thought you had one outage and it ended up being 12 or 14 outages that year. Those SLAs are important to you as well. And they need to be built into your contracts. They need to make sure you have some penalties for that as well. And I'm going to go back to my partner scenario. Partner with people with deep manufacturing experience. On the IT side, I will be one of the first ones to tell you, I am not going to be intricately involved with every command or every control that's being executed on an HMI SCADA. Not going to do it, can't do it. So you have to get a partner who has what I call OT whisperers. OT whisperers these are the type of people that have been out there in the field. They've actually, they've been ex-plant managers, they've been supervisors, they've been in and walking the plants. They know exactly what's going on in that environment. They walk into your organization when you're presenting to that C-suite and that supply chain person. They know the language, and they can talk the language. They gain instant credibility. This is going to help sell your program. It's going to help improve your program. And then don't settle. Don't settle, don't settle, don't settle. You can actually have there's safe ways of doing IT and OT level in the same environment in a reasonable way. Now, this is a bonus slide. We talk about communication and risk management. I have to throw this slide in there because now, as I mentioned, I'm transitioning more to that communication and risk management to make sure that the organization understands what it means when we start talking about making changes into IT/OT world. Communicate early and often. Don't feel that you can't communicate. The success of the program is going to be built on or based upon you ensuring that your communications are effective, have the right level of detail, and that actionable, which is why I come to the next step of your risk register. If you don't have a risk register, create one. Make sure that it's actionable. Because the C-suite can give you funding. They can also move mountains to make sure that your directions or your directives are met by addressing actionable items in your risk register. Review them as quarterly at most with your C-suite. I'm going to jump down to the last note under here. We're talking about don't focus on good metrics. Good metrics are great. Everyone wants to pat themselves on the back. Hey, great, I got my bonus. Woohoo! But guess what? You need to focus on those metrics that are going to show some negative connotations to your program. And these metrics, these are the ones, as we talk about communicating early and often, these are the ones that go on the risk register. These are also the ones that need to be in play for decisions at the C-suite level. I'm going to jump over to the risk management side. I talked earlier about this, the supply chain risk profiles. It is imperative that you have these profiles defined by the business and also by the supply chain. You need to have clearly defined risk appetites and tolerances. We talked about a plant being down for 2 days may not be as impactful to a plant being down 10 days if that one plant that was down 2 days has a risk appetite that I'm gonna make the stock and I make enough inventory to suffice or meet my demand for at least a week. So make sure that's clearly defined, and in the OT and the IT world, because those sites, when they look at their preventive maintenance windows, they can factor that into the equation. Your governance boards, we talked about, that was mentioned on the earlier case one. Those governance boards are at various levels, and they meet at various times. They're talking about what's going on my manufacturing side, what's going on my at the corporate level, and what's going on in the overall program. Legal and privacy need to become a permanent seat at the table in these discussions, as well as crisis management, security operations, and that representation as well. Okay. So I'm going to bring this all together because I know I've been talking for a while here, but I want to make sure I gave you a slide to take away that says, how do we bring this all together and how do we make your program successful going forward? Create the business case first, not dashboards or metrics. Dashboards and metrics are only going to show how you're doing, how you're progressing. But the leadership team want to see that early on, even though there hasn't been any work done. Gain the manufacturing trust. And I'm going to come back and say manufacturing trust means at the beginning is zero trust. So you have to gain their trust in supporting this environment and supporting this initiative. Your culture is because of these programs, is very disruptive. So your culture has to be allowed to understand that it's okay that we're disrupting the environment because we're going to put in place mitigation, we're going to put together controls, and we're going to put together a formal process to make sure we continue successfully on with this engagement. So take your blueprint away that says, lay out the business plan, milestones and metrics, make sure your C-suite is engaged, think global, act locally. Use technology as an enabler, not as a total driver. And don't settle for just network analysis, because most of the times we look at the network and say we can put in microsegmentation, we can put in a firewall, but design your network in the proper alignment with the site. Don't give them a networking solution for a site that's 24/7 when the site is only available 5/7. It has to be scalable, it has to meet the demand of the organization, and it has to meet their risk appetite. And of course, my words of wisdom or takeaway is get a great PM and get a great partner. Make sure you're going to do what you said you're going to do when you're going to do it, because everyone's looking at you to make sure this program is successful. Disruption to the supply chain is everyone's problem. And of course, we go to final saying that it takes a village. It really does. In order to be successful, it's going to take a village of people to get this project done. I thank you for your time, and I hope I've given you some words that can help.
I'd like to invite up our additional panelists in addition to our presenters too. We have John Livingston, who is CEO of Verve Industrial. And we have Christopher Blavelt, who is Director of Operational Technologies, US East for Fortinet. So just to kick off, John, why don't we start with you? Just give us a couple of words about what you do and, why you're here and so forth, and then we'll move on to Chris.
Sure. So I'm John Livingston. As Larry said, I'm the CEO of Verve Industrial. And we talked, I think, in the session with the various introductions, but we're an OT cybersecurity solution provider. We have a platform that helps our clients both manage the endpoints as well as the overall security management program. And then we provide a range of services, such as Tim was describing, around the overall program development and helping clients manage their overall OT security programs.
Chris Blauvelt, can you guys hear me?
Yeah, can we get Chris's microphone up a little bit?
Yeah. So Chris Blauvelt, Director of Operational Technology at Fortinet. I spent 10 years in the power industry, came to Fortinet because I wanted to help create solutions that could protect ICS. So spent time as plant manager, designer of SCADA systems, and I believe I'm a OT whisperer as well.
All right. Sid, did you have any questions from the audience to start off with? Otherwise, I'll just get us started here. I would like to talk about developing people and training because I think that was a pretty common theme in both of your presentations. It's not something we've talked about much, in the previous session or in other sessions that I've seen. So let's talk about developing people. I mean, developing these comprehensive cybersecurity programs in plant environments is very human resource intensive. Cybersecurity is not necessarily a domain of expertise for the everyday OT person. And Tim, you and I were talking about this earlier. I want your thoughts on, are you developing your own cybersecurity experts from within the OT world? Are you hiring people from IT and teaching them OT? What's the best way to go about developing expertise within your company for OT cybersecurity? Anybody care to jump in on that?
Yeah, I mean, I can certainly jump in.
Sure.
I did mention it in our group. I mean, we partnership with our IT side of the business on the security piece, but we want our staff to be, I mentioned it to the presentation, to be level at a certain certification. We're going to use the ISA certification as our baseline. I do have several SCADA people with SAN certification as well. And in fact, one of our IT analysts, our security analyst, just took his OT SAN certification. So it's a two-way street. It's really good when the IT department understands what we do, what our challenges are, and vice versa. We need to understand what the IT department does, why they do what they do, and how we can apply that to our business. So it's
Yeah.
can't be afraid of losing people either once you get them trained. I mean, that's
No, you can't. Yeah, and
Yeah.
SANS has some great training. I know that. Tim, you want to comment?
So we do a combination, we do a hybrid. So we take a combination of the OT resources that are there, provide training for them. We could train them in basic cybersecurity training, and we also expand that into giving them a different, what we call badge of honor. So we take them to the levels of what does it mean to get cyber certified or training in both IT and OT. Then we're looking at them as being ambassadors to help train other folks within the plants and facilities. So they're that go-to person to help bridge the gap. And yes, we expect that at some point we're going to lose those folks, but that we're bringing in a younger talent pool as well and making them junior cyber ambassadors to help to ensure that there's a transition in there as well.
Both good points.
Can I add one? The training is one piece, but I think the education for all the employees is huge. I can't, we've had a great program, had specific programs for our operators, our supervisors, our management on OT security, as well as all the aspects of cybersecurity from an IT perspective and a personal perspective. And that needs to just be continuous, but it needs to be targeted and short. If you're doing anything more than 5 minutes once a month, you're losing your audience really quickly, and it needs to be kind of fun. I don't know what else to say. I know training's usually not fun. I've been to thousands of hours of safety training. It's never really fun, but it's necessary,
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's what I was about to bring up, is that we spend a lot of time on electrical safety training, right? Everybody in your plant has probably taken electrical safety training, hazardous material handling safety training. Cyber is really no different, right? It's a threat to your environment. It can be a threat to health and safety. You have your generalists that know the basics, and then you might have your electricians, you might have your material handlers who are the experts. And really, OT cybersecurity is no different.
Yes, do we have a question from the audience? Please just let us know who you are and your company.
Hi there, Roberto Pena with DuPont. Tim, you had mentioned taking a full inventory of all the software, all the devices and everything before going into developing your EDR plan. How did you do that? How long did it take, and what tools did you use, or how difficult was that?
Yeah, anybody can jump in anytime. Yeah.
So I'm sorry, could you clarify the question again? I'm so sorry, I'm apologize. I'm sorry.
Yeah, so you had mentioned about taking a full inventory of all the devices, all of the software, and just wondering how you went about doing that. Was it very difficult? I know we're starting to take our inventories and having a very difficult time with some of that.
Yes, that is the biggest. That's a very interesting question. I appreciate that one. That's actually where you do a combination of your audit process, because there's your time. You have internal auditors who are constantly going around assessing your environment. They're helping with your inventories. You're going to your quality systems and getting the inventories. Until you get a tool that's actually doing discovery of everything, then you have to do some of these manual inventory assessments and collections and help dump them into some type of database or your service management type tool or ticketing system, so that you can actually have a good inventory of your assets, knowing you're going to still have gaps and you're going to always be monitoring this on a continuous basis.
Anybody else want to comment?
I mean, I can comment, we operate 850 facilities. It could be a pressure sensor in the side of the road, or it could be a large water treatment plant. I will tell you, we probably don't have as much information on those small sites. The larger plants, we have more information. We try to put everything on our side in our asset management system, at least from a component that has an Ethernet connection on it, right? So we know what it is, or even a serial connection. Yes, we still use RS-232, 485 communication. We want to make sure that we capture that, maybe not at the granular level of what firmware, what level you might have with the tool, but at least we know we have, PLC XYZ, and it was installed in 2015.
I just comment on when you do deploy the technology to do this, the way we approach that from our technology point of view is you have to get to the endpoint. So whether it be on a Windows, Unix, Linux system, actually using an OT-specific endpoint agent to gather that data. And then the way we do it, although there's lots of options, the way we do it is we will then go specifically to those end devices we discover through our agent and communicate with them in their native protocols to pull back that data. So if it's a Rockwell PLC, we'll communicate in the SIP protocol. We'll then SIP path out the back end of that through the back end to the NVT cards and the devices around that SIP pathing. Similarly, whether it be a Siemens S7 or you name it, right? The only way to really get that from a technology point of view is you have to be at the endpoint. The stuff just unfortunately isn't on the quote unquote wire, right? You're not going to get the firmware version on the wire. And so the way we've designed ours is to literally go and ask the device. And the only way you can do that is to have the OT whisperers to do that in a really safe way. And we've been doing it for about 30 years. So otherwise you can, if you're not doing that exactly right, you can cause issues, but we've figured out how to deal with that. So.
Just to follow up, we've noticed as we started taking our inventories, and even just the devices that are on our process control network, not counting all of the unnetworked ones, or as you say, the I/O and those types of things, or the private networks, we're finding that we have a lot more devices on the OT network than you have on a business network. And it's not something that our IT folks or even our business managers have recognized before. So how have you been able to stress the difference between an OT network and an IT network and just the sheer size and the number of devices that you have to deal with?
I'll jump on what John said. We had an incident early on with the new cybersecurity piece where they went to a facility without an OT person and bricked the PLCs. So that was a quick education and level set everyone real quick that, hey, we're different, and when we break, we are 24/7. That's the fact of life. Fortunately, we have protocols to operate manually and take care of it to get the stuff recovered. So that was a good education to our team that, hey, we're different. But it's just communication. I mean, that's really an education. I always ask, do you have a hard hat? Do you have safety shoes? Let's take a walk. Let's walk through everything. show them every dirty nook and cranny of a facility that you have. I was like to take them to the worst wastewater treatment plant we have. You know, you're going to separate the men from the boys at that point, but it's good to get that experience and let them know this is what we're doing. We're controlling a piece of equipment that someone might work on as a safety issue. You know, our product's consumed. You know, one of the few products that goes through a pipe someone consumes, or we have to use fire service. So it's very important that we have that mindset going in. It's just communication and education and developing that trust and partnership.
You know, I'd always say that I'm everyone's son, because no matter where I went, they'd say, listen, son, right? When we mess up, people can die, right? And so, I mean, they weren't saying that to make themselves feel big. They were saying that to stress the importance of, you know, you're DuPont. When things go wrong, explosions can happen, right? Whereas if the email goes down, that's extremely inconvenient, but nobody dies. And so, like he said, you know, get that hard hat on. Where's your safety toe shoes? And if you don't have that, you're not even coming into my environment, right? I find when I put those things on, it's like, you know, when I was in the Army, putting on my uniform, it changes your mindset. And things like that can change your mindset. Whereas if you're back in the office, fiddling with a keyboard, you can forget the ramifications of what you're doing.
One of the things is that in terms of how do you communicate to IT that these things really exist, I think one of the biggest challenges that OT has is that the data is stuck at the plants in many cases, right? And so, again, maybe it's a spreadsheet or whatever. And so we find that once you pull it up into that quote unquote think global idea, right? Get all those assets centrally visible, even not all of them, like do 4 sites. And all of a sudden you pull that into a dashboard that's accessible by the senior team and they see all of those devices. Wait, what is all that stuff? Right, what are you doing with that? And then to make it more powerful, you shoot it up to their ServiceNow. We integrate with ServiceNow. All of a sudden it's in their database. And when they see it in their database, it's like, whoa, okay, now I'm adding those up and I'm adding up, you know, and now I'm gonna multiply those 4 sites by 12 because I have 50 sites. Oh my God. But until they can visualize that with numbers by site, it's hard if it's like, oh yeah, it's out there in some dusty, right? Well, now it's a number on a sheet. It becomes a lot more obvious, I guess.
It's more than dusky. It's hot and dirty and hazardous, and these are nasty environments. They're not climate-controlled server rooms. Did you want to say something, Tim?
And then I put my risk hat on, and I take that dashboard, and I massage that data, and I present it back to the plants. I present it back to the business, and say, I have a lot of unknown assets here. Or I have a lot of unclassified assets. Now I need you, business, to tell me how you own this, because when I go back and look at the impact, if I have a cyber attack, and I tell you that this is an unknown asset, what's the risk? So I need you to put that risk hat on to go back and take a look at the assets as well.
Yeah, I went to an ICS JWG conference once, and I asked how many people ever heard of a heat tracing system, and everybody was just like, what are you talking about? So do we have another question from the audience here? I thought I saw somebody with their hand up. Oh, okay, right here, sir.
Hi, so Oren again. So this is in relation also to the discussion we just had now, and to Keith about your criteria for the EDR. So first of all, sorry that VAX was singled out. Awesome OS. PDP 11 as well. But when you talked about that selection process, you talked about the constraints for the endpoints, but we were also hearing about don't touch OT endpoints. So was there a certification process for you to decide which OT endpoints you could install the 40 EDR on? Great solution, by the way, to avoid, effects or to avoid manufacturer certifications, because that's a lot of the, if I have an endpoint agent, like I'm not allowed to install it. So what was the process on ensuring where you could install beyond just resources?
So, I mean, the delineation is we're on 98% Windows devices, right? It doesn't, we tried installing it on CE. I can't remember if we had it successful or not. but we're not on PLCs, we're not on something that does control, we're on the HMI servers. Anything that's designed to be on is where we decide to put on. And that's why we spent a lot of time in simulation mode to really understand what was being kicked out for alerts, what products were going to be isolated, and what was the effect that's going to be on our business. So that, that's where it is installed right now. We are not on the PLC endpoints. We're not on our, cell modems running Linux and that type of stuff.
Yeah, and I will say that to address that concern, we're working with every major OEM to become a certified solution for exactly that reason. I don't want to void your warranty, right? Because bad things will happen if something goes wrong. A lot of finger pointing happens. And so it's important to us that we overcome that objection as well.
Can I ask a question, Larry?
No.
Sure.
No, the thing that always comes up with the EDR, people ask me, is, this connection with the cloud. A lot of the EDR solutions, and I even though that's a client of mine, I honestly don't know the details of yours, so I'm not setting him up to make a good comment, bad comment, whatever. But, in your system, I come from the steel industry, so when you talk about dirty, filthy, horrible places, believe me, I know them very well. But I also know that nobody wants to open up those networks, and we heard that all day today. Even though I get up on the stage and say you should, everybody knows that. But I can appreciate the other side. And I'm just wondering, for the EDR, for the 40 EDR, how much of that do you need interaction with the cloud or with other things, and how do you deal with that issue? Because in the end, for an IT, the ideal thing is all of a sudden, you get this data, you send it up to the cloud, can put in fancy analytics and look for all kinds of things, and and it's very powerful. But you get down to the OT and you say, well, I don't want anybody getting into that plant or out of that plant. So how are you? To what extent are you doing that, the EDR, and how do you do that? I guess is my question.
So we have two modes of operation. We have one that is usually preferred in the IT side, which is where every endpoint communicates with the cloud. I would say I have not met an OT customer where that would be okay. He's shaking his head, yeah. And so what we also have is what we call an on-prem installation. You can think of it as kind of as a proxy. And so essentially what you do is you have a server within your IDMZ. All your endpoints communicate with it. It communicates with the cloud. And so you have very tight coupling of one machine to the cloud. Makes your rule sets a lot easier, and really gives that comfort factor that you don't have machines just communicating with the cloud. And we can do that in a variety of ways, whether it's IP whitelisting or things like that, to make sure that that machine can only communicate with the FortiGuard servers. Did you?
Yeah,
Thank you.
From an
You
end
couldn't hear
user
me.
perspective, that was one of our main criterias, and we whitelist that IP, we go specific, and we're like 2 DMZs deep in how we do this, and we go through our business. It's a long process, but that traffic is needed to bring that intelligence down. So it's again, what's your risk, what's your tolerance, and what do you want to mitigate? So,
and also if you have a temporary loss of connection, we don't shut the whole thing down, right? That's also important. And we have seen some times where maybe not EDR, but other types of solutions that use the cloud. If you lose your connection, your operations go down.
Is the EDR also doing the anti-malware type protection and stuff? Because then you have the opposite issue of sending down the doing updates and all that stuff.
Signature-based versus activity-based is, I think, the crux of your question. And so essentially what it does is it uses signatures, right? That's an easy way to catch known malware. But it also embeds itself in the kernel, and so uses activity profiling to determine what is malicious behavior. And then when it responds, it only responds on that process, which is also really important. The talk we gave yesterday about specificity, shutting down the entire endpoint is usually not possible. And so we shut down just the malicious process, allow you to determine whether or not you want it to continue, whether or not you want to roll back anything that had changed.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Oh, we have a question over here.
Question for Keith, Blake from Exxon. The two EDR solution, one for IT and one for OT, how did you come up with that decision? What complexities did it rise, especially did it impact your SOC, and then how did you overcome those challenges?
Yeah, that's, so we were second to the party, I guess you would say. So the IT decision was already made, and just as we had that discussion on how you get that threat intelligence, that tool had to have every endpoint connected to the internet, so immediately that kind of struck it down. Also, they did not have any OT kind of experience, right? And so we looked at this at a global level, and as you know, us OT people across the world kind of stuck together, picked what we wanted to pick that worked and that we were comfortable with. So, I mean, from a SOC side, they get all our data from, through our SIEM on that side, so we try to make it as similar as possible. I will say that we had a trip on our last week, on our, not on our SCADA side, but on our business side. And that same data came from our next generation firewalls that we were blocking all that kind of stuff. So they've done a good job of correlating that data, what's in the OT side, what's in the IT side. If we have a threat in the IT side, how's it affecting the OT side? So it's worked out well. We have changed our SOC provider in the last 6 months, and we're much, much happier with our new provider.
Okay, if you have any other questions, get them ready, because we got a lot of experts here. So take the opportunity to ask the questions while you can. And I'm going to ask one of my own questions. One of my areas of interest has always been alarms and alerts. And in process automation, there's the ISA 18.2 standard for alarm management. Basically, in process control, the cost of adding alarms to systems went down to zero. Anybody could do it. And then we wound up with a huge problem of too many alarms and operators ignoring alarms. Are we headed for a similar situation with cybersecurity? Can you give us any advice on how to manage alarms and alerts with cybersecurity platforms and OT cybersecurity? Any words of wisdom on how to do alarms and alerts?
Well, there are multiple questions there. So I'll address the first one. Are we headed toward the same thing? I would say yes, unless we do something about it. I'd say one of the solutions is to establish a framework of what the alarms are, how they're associated. I'm a fan of MITRE ATT&CK for ICS. I'm sure there's more frameworks out there, but I think that's the most specific one for ICS that I have seen, and addresses OT's particular needs. And so correlate alarms to the cyber kill chain and to whatever standard you decide to use. And I think that will go a long way towards triaging those alarms, whether automatically or giving a framework for your SOC operators to triage. Okay. Tim?
So I'm going to add a little bit more. I agree with everything he's saying, but I also want to add a little bit more control or structure around that. In the areas of now, as we start to look at more war gaming or tabletopping, you also want to start to set up that process of simulating, looking at those alerts and simulating a tabletop with your controls, your SOC teams, to make sure that they're seeing the right alerts, they're analyzing it the right way, and they're putting together after action plans or risk approach to understand what that's meaning to the organization. Because you're going to, like you were saying, you're going to get a lot of them. And you got to be able to streamline them.
Good advice.
I just want to add on to there is that I think in ICS we spend a lot of time making sure that we have really high confidence in our data. It is the attacker's job to give us misleading data, right, as part of that attack. Right. And so, there's a term within the intelligence community of deconflicting through multiple sources. We need to be prepared to say, hey, this is the alarm I have. Is there something else that confirms this information, or is this the trash can fire while they're over here, right? And there's two rules. is that, one, you won't always see the attack coming, but two, the diversion that you're ignoring is actually the main attack, right? So, you gotta make sure that you're deconflicting through multiple sources, and that's different than what we're used to as an operator of a SCADA system.
Yeah, very different. Yeah.
One of the things that we've been doing with our clients is I mentioned our history of being control systems engineers, and so we were doing alarm management on the operations process side before we got into security originally. And so we've basically taken those process alarms into the same database as our security alarms. And so what that allows you to do is, to your point, link another data set to it. So, okay, great, I'm seeing some MITRE attack alert. All right, am I actually seeing anything on the process variables? Am I actually seeing what I would expect to see, or am I now starting to see anomalous patterns of temperature, pressure, whatever? And am I seeing a change in my alarm status on the physical process side? Because at the end of the day, that's likely what an attacker is trying to do. It's not the only thing, but it is at least one thing that it's trying to do. And so by bringing in those multiple data sets to your analytics, you can start to tie pieces together, because adding that context can help you reduce the false alarms that you make.
Yeah, yeah, that's a really good point. Thanks, John. Anybody else want to comment on that? I do have another question, unless we have somebody from the.
I have a question out here.
Oh, great. Let's take that question. Yeah.
Cusimano's not allowed to ask any questions. Yeah. That's a rule. There's a general rule at all our conferences. Cusimano can't ask questions.
Hey, it could be a softball. John Cusimano, Deloitte. I wanted to build on what Larry, your question's a great question. How do we deal, now that we've instrumented our ICS systems and we're monitoring our networks and we know our asset inventory, and all these great tools out there help us not only identify our assets, but also identify known vulnerabilities in those assets and correlate them to CVSS scores. Now we know what we didn't know, that all these vulnerabilities, well, I guess I say we know what we knew, but it's documented. That there's all these vulnerabilities in our ICS systems that have been there for years, but now the tools have told us that they're there.
There's a report. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So so it's analogous to the alarm rationalization problem. Now we have what we call a vulnerability rationalization problem. We've got all these vulnerabilities with CVSS scores, but all they tell us is the base score. It's an 8, it's a 10, and the normal response from IT is you got to patch everything, and of course in the ICS OT environment that's not practical. And a 10 here in one area of the plant could be very different than a 10 here. Same PLC, but based on its functionality, where it is in the architecture. So long story short, question is vulnerability rationalization. How are you guys dealing with that? Are you feeling that, number one? And how are you dealing with that this information that you now know, that potentially thousands of CVEs that are popping out of these tools? How are you managing that?
You want to go, Keith? So I'll tell you how a range of our clients are dealing with that problem. So the first is that as we think about that CVSS score, right, trying to put an overall risk score to the asset that takes CVSS, but also takes into account other dimensions of risk on the asset. So for instance, how's that asset configured? Is it pretty well securely configured or not? Number two, is it sitting behind a firewall, multiple layers of firewalls, right? What process is it running? Is it a critical process? Is it a not critical process? Does it have EDR or whitelisting, and is that whitelisting in lockdown or not? And so what we're doing is we're essentially creating an overall risk score for the asset that CVSS is one part of, but it's a more, what we call a 360-degree score on that asset. So that's the first piece, is giving a more enriched view of the score. But then the second piece is, as we think about the program, how do we remediate those? And so working through a set of mitigating controls when I can't patch that device, to say, okay, I can't patch it, but I can, shut down all non-critical ports. I can make sure my my AV or EDR, whatever is engaged. I can make sure whitelisting. So I can take a number of actions that mitigate without patching until I can patch, right? Because eventually I'll want to patch those things. And then the last thing is bringing in exploit data, right? Because every CVSS score isn't the same. If I don't have or it could be, but I need to get the exploit data. So what we've done is bring out on that new CISA, not new, 18 months old, whatever, the CISA database on exploits, which is wonderful. There's a lot of exploit databases out there, but that's a really nice one, that's there. And so by bringing that in, it gives another bit of context to how risky that. So there's a variety of things you can do to address the problem, but there's no, so we get a lot of calls about SBOMs. Oh, well, we'd like you to analyze all the SBOMs. We're happy to do that, but you've got 42,000 critical vulnerabilities right now. Would you like 90,000 critical vulnerabilities or 200,000? Because we can find them, but shouldn't we? Let's go after these first, right? Anyway.
Yeah, and I'll raise that up beyond vulnerabilities, but also sometimes ongoing attacks within your network. We have had customers that said, this HMI is infected in my environment right now. We have quarantined it from the network, and we're going to continue to operate with that malware on there for the next 8 months until we have scheduled downtime. That is a decision, when you look at your risk and other requirements that you have, based on your operational requirements. And so, dealing with risk as impact and probability, right? The combination of the two, sometimes is about how do you reduce that probability versus reducing the impact. Now you can reduce the impact or the probability to zero if you patch, but there are other ways to reduce that probability. From a technological perspective, one of the things that we're able to do is identify those vulnerabilities and protect them within the firewall. And so using the IPS system within the firewall, we can detect that somebody's trying to exploit that vulnerability and then black hole the traffic, create the alarm, et cetera.
Okay, we timed that perfectly. It's 5:30 right now, unless we have another question.
Time's up.
Time is up. Thanks, everybody, for coming in for the last session. I know everybody's kind of tired, but I want to thank our presenters and our panelists, too. They did a great job.